Resident Evil has a lot of spin-offs, and some are actually eventually paid off, while others are still left up in the air to speculate and discuss. And there's one specifically, in particular, that has everyone interested, including myself, which completely dropped like the craziest bombshell. And what am I talking about exactly? Well, it's the BSAA using bioweapons. And in case you don't know what the BSAA is really all about, I'll be explaining a little recap and why this story really matters and why Capcom should really, and I mean really, finish this off. To understand the corruption, we have to start at the beginning, where the BSAA was formed, which was of course by Joel and obviously Chris, and I guess also that other guy called Clive O'Brien, if I'm butchering his name. Essentially, their purpose is obviously to stop bioterrorism and obviously, monsters in this world in general. Which of course they've actually done a really good job, and you can see this very clearly in stuff like obviously Resident Evil 5, trying to put a stop to Wesker's plan. The BSAA are obviously the good guys in this scenario, different from other groups that we've seen before. And of course, actually a lot more, I guess, reliable, because they actually do get the job done quite efficiently, so I ain't gonna complain too much when it comes to BSAA. Obviously STARS was kind of already, going down because thanks to the likes of Chief Irons and obviously Wesker, so they had a lot of people that was just kind of bringing them down. But the BSAA was kind of different. Of course though, the war started to crack in RE6, and this is where we kind of see the BSAA kind of operating in a different direction. By the time we get to obviously Resident Evil 6, the BSAA becomes more militarized, more political, and more willing to hide information from the likes of Chris and Piers and other characters in the BSAA. This wasn't an organization Chris helped at all, because it's so different from what they originally were, which was obviously to fight bioterrorism and overall monsters in the world. And now they're just kind of your typical political military unit, which Chris wasn't really feeling. And of course, if you think maybe they was just kind of misunderstood or probably, kind of lost with their direction of things, and maybe that will come back. And a lot of people probably thought that as well, or probably take a different direction. However, in RE7 and RE8, the corruption becomes undeniable at this point, and you really just cannot hide this. You can't even put it under a rug because it's just too obvious. Because Chris obviously finds out that the BSAA, when obviously trying to fight the Megamyces, didn't send regular soldiers, they sent bioweapons. The organization built to stop bioweapons is now using them. This is when I think a lot of RE fans, including myself, said, okay, please explain this. This is insane. You can't just drop a bombshell like this and expect us to just be like, oh yeah, that's cool, let's just ignore it. No, you cannot, and this is where the issue really lies with. Sure, other stories like obviously Billy Cohen, like Whereabouts, or where obviously the likes of Raymond and Jessica and that sort of virus that they was doing, stuff like that, I could understand. You could probably put more under the rug, the whereabouts of certain characters. But there's one thing you cannot just simply do at all, and that is the BSAA. The BSAA is everywhere. You cannot ignore them. They are literally in so many countries. They're a literal military force that just can't just be ignored. What are they, freaking one special unit of Umbrella? No, they're the BSAA, so of course you can't just hide them and just call it, a day and just say, hey, you know what, let's forget about them. No, this isn't something that you could just do. The whole organization that Chris helped formed is now using bioweapons, a threat that obviously Umbrella used a lot, and if anything, this is no different from when obviously Umbrella sent out Mr. X and Nemesis out in Raccoon City. This is literally the same sort of wavelength, honestly, of thinking. Imagine being in Chris's shoes and finding out you're basically supporting the same group that started Raccoon City. Basically, essentially, that is literally what they've become. And you just want to ignore it. That's where I think a lot of people has been, making discussions, speculations, honestly, about this, because it's not something that's so small. It's quite big, massive even. Something that's kind of of the equivalent of I don't know, let's just use a movie for example, like Avengers Endgame or even Infinity War. It's just that big of a sort of thing that you just cannot really just hide. And hopefully they do cover this, and maybe, and just possibly maybe, Resident Evil Requiem might be setting the stage for this actual story, because I know Resident Evil Requiem does seem to be more of a, I wouldn't say a personal story, maybe, but it doesn't seem obviously as massive as obviously what we're thinking of when it comes to BSAA. And maybe, you know, Victor Gideon might be helping them out, and we find out that of course this is, you know, where they're being supplied with bioweapons and stuff, which wouldn't surprise me, because considering how the zombies are in Requiem so far, they seem a lot more intelligent than what we have in Resident Evil 1. Now, we don't know who they're actually working with, because of course, I know obviously the BSAA is good for military works and stuff, but when it comes to bioterrorism and actually being in-handed with that, I think they'll have someone else working with them, probably some weird guy like Victor Gideon, like I've already mentioned, or maybe someone else, or a different group like Blue Umbrella. Of course, I know Blue Umbrella is kind of there to obviously atone for the crimes of bioterrorism. However, you gotta think that, you know, it's still Umbrella at the end of the day. It's called Blue Umbrella. Like, you really just cannot, I don't know, it's just really hard to not ignore the fact that they're still called Umbrella and not something else. If they was called something else, I would kind of sweep it under the rug. But if you call it Blue Umbrella, it still makes it really suspicious, and I can understand why the public doesn't really trust them. Of course, they do have limited military support, but who knows, the BSAA could be working on them with the side. Of course, that's just kind of my speculation of what I'm thinking of, who's involved with obviously the BSAA. Either Victor Gideon or Blue Umbrella, some sort of involvement. The BSAA corruption arc is definitely one of like the most interesting unfinished storylines, which actually affects the lore, the history going forth, and pretty much all characters in that sense, because like I said, the BSAA is not small, so they definitely need to tackle this in a way that is smart and intelligent, and I think that's probably why it's taking so much time. Of course, we will see how things pan out and how things will go forth when it comes to Resident Evil after obviously Resident Evil Requiem. If you guys obviously have your own theories and stuff, let me know in the comment section below, and hey, if you enjoyed this video, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe for more Resident Evil content here on the channel. I'll see you all next time. Peace out guys, and have a lovely day.